pretty much anything that you might need a lot of can be moved by barge. It's a very economical way to move cargo. One towboat can push as many as 15 barges up and down the Tennessee River. Each barge can handle 1,250 tons of material, which is equal to 60 tractor-trailer loads per barge. If you do a little quick math, 60 tractor-trailer loads per barge times 15 barges per tow, that's equal to 900 tractor-trailer loads of material being pushed by one single towboat. If anybody in town is looking for a great place to eat, coming up here on the right, the starboard side of the boat, you can see where it says Scotty's on the River. That's an excellent restaurant. It's a local favorite. It's pretty new. They built it just about 3 or 4 years ago here at the right here at this hotel. This is the Spring Hill Suites. It opened up in 2008, and it's the only hotel in downtown Chattanooga right on the water. We actually get a lot of visitors that come to town by boat nowadays, whether they're coming down from Knoxville, Tennessee, or up from Huntsville, Alabama, or beyond. The Tennessee River dumps into the Ohio River at Paducah, Kentucky. The Ohio River dumps into the Mississippi River at Cairo, Illinois. And of course, the Mississippi River dumps into the Gulf of Mexico at New Orleans. So there's actually no place in the world that you can't get to by boat from right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Over on the port side of the boat, the left-hand side, if you're facing the front, you can see there's a tall brick smokestack sticking up above the trees. Now, right over there next door to that, that's not actually part of it, but that's where our Chattanooga Bakery is. Does anybody happen to know what they make at the Chattanooga Bakery? Moon pies, that's right. Every moon pie you ever had came from right over there across the river. Now, moon pies became very popular when they first came out. They became popular with miners, as in coal miners. Moon pies were quite filling. They fit nicely into your lunchbox, and they only cost 5 cents. What's the old saying down here in the South? What's for lunch? An RC Cola and a moon pie. Royal Crown Cola is also from Chattanooga. Now there's actually a trick to eating moon pies. Does anybody know what it is? Next time you have one, put it in the microwave for about 6 seconds. Not any longer than that. You don't actually want to melt the chocolate. But if you microwave the moon pie for around 6 seconds, it'll soften up and be more like eating a campfire s'more than it will be like eating a moon pie.
How you doing, Tristan? You want a moon pie? Yeah.
This hill here on the right, by the way, is Cameron Hill. Cameron Hill has a ton of history. Up on top of that hill today is Blue Cross Blue Shields for the state of Tennessee. That's their state headquarters. But a lot of things have been built on that hill over the years. The first thing that was built up there was a casino. And the city actually built its very first incline railway to get people up and down Cameron Hill to get to and from the casino. Up ahead of us, we're getting ready to go back underneath the Ojati Bridge. This is one of 4 bridges in the downtown area. The Ojati Bridge was built back in the 1950s, and it was named for former Mayor Ojati, who was instrumental in having it built. Now, historically, the Ojati Bridge is not significant. It's just a bridge, but it is the main artery from Chattanooga to the north. It's our Highway 27 bridge. Now, the Ojati Bridge happens to be my favorite bridge. Would you all like to know why it's my favorite bridge? You would. It's because it has great acoustics. One of the reasons it has great acoustics is because it's actually a lot wider than it was when it was first built. They recently widened this bridge for the second time since the 1950s, if that's any indication of how much Chattanooga has grown since then. Chattanooga's growing a lot faster than much of the rest of the country. Part of the reason for that, I think, is that people come here for a vacation, then realize what an excellent place Chattanooga is to live, and just never leave. That's exactly what happened to me about 16 years ago. Well, that and they're still looking for me up in Indiana. Now this boat here on the right, this is our dock where we left from today. If that looks familiar to anyone, that's because it used to be the President Riverboat Casino out of Davenport, Iowa. Up above our dock, for all of you baseball fans on board, you can see those stadium lights sticking up. That is AT&T Field, home of the Chattanooga Lookouts. They're a AA ball club and a feeder team to the Cincinnati Reds. Now all of this that you see here on the right between these two bridges, this is a city park that we call Ross's Landing. Ross's Landing is the beginning of our city. This is where a man named John Ross, who had grown up at the base of Lookout Mountain, started a trading post here along the shore back in 1815. He also operated a ferry to get people back and forth across the Tennessee River. John Ross was 1/8 Cherokee, and he would later on become the first elected chief of the Cherokee Nations. Now this city was actually called, or this town anyway, was actually called Ross's Landing up until 1839. That's when we got the name Chattanooga. And by the way, you all know what Chattanooga means, don't you? You don't? Well, that's okay. Nobody knows what it means. It's kind of a made-up word. Most historians concur that Chattanooga comes from two old Creek Indian words, chatta, meaning rock, and nuga, meaning dwelling, meaning Lookout Mountain. So they think that we actually get our name from Lookout Mountain. I disagree though, folks. I'm a bit of a historian myself. Would you all like to know what I think Chattanooga means? I think Chattanooga is an old Cherokee Indian word that means place where tourists bring money. In particular, right here to our Tennessee Aquarium. That's the large buildings here on the starboard side with the angular glass roofs. The Tennessee Aquarium opened up in 1992, and it is the world's largest freshwater aquarium. Nice to see people out enjoying the sunshine today, even though it is a bit chilly out. Now, if you look at the level of the water here on the right, you can see that it comes right up to the edge of this sidewalk. There's usually about 5 foot of concrete down below that you can see. This section right here with all these pillars sticking up, this is actually a dock. We call it the hard edge or the hard wall. It's made for very large boats when they come to town for a visit. Boats like the American Queen, the largest riverboat in the world today, or one of her sister ships, the American Countess or the American Duchess. We have some other visitors that come to town on occasion. Boats like the LST 325, that's the landing ship tank. It's a floating museum used during World War II. Or boats like the Nina and the Pinta, the replica sailing ships used by Christopher Columbus in his epic voyage to the New World. Now the next bridge that we're getting ready to go underneath, this is our Market Street Bridge, but it was rededicated in 1954, and it's now also called the Chief John Ross Memorial Bridge. It's a bascule-style lift bridge. The bascule part refers to the two concrete counterweights on either side of the main span, and it's designed to open up like a clamshell for large riverboats to go through, even in times of high water. Now they say that this bridge was so well designed, so well engineered and balanced, that it takes the use of just a 10 horsepower motor to open and close the center span. A lot of us have lawnmowers with more than 10 horsepower. Funny story though, since this bridge was built, let's see, 1917, how long ago was that? 600. 106 years ago. 106 years ago, how many times do you think they've actually had to open it to let a boat through? Any guesses?
No.
Once. One single time have they had to open this bridge for a boat. And that was only a few years back when the Delta Queen left town. So it's a good thing they were thinking ahead. Now, if you look off to the left, after we go underneath the Market Street Bridge, you'll see another city park. This is Coolidge Park. Coolidge Park opened up in 1990, and it was dedicated to a local man who won the Medal of Honor for his services during World War II, a man named Charles H. Coolidge. Mr. Coolidge sadly passed away just a couple of years ago, and up until then, he still lived right here in Chattanooga. And he was one of only two living World War II Medal of Honor recipients still with us. Now, one of the neatest features of Coolidge Park is what's underneath that round blue roof. Underneath that building, or inside that building, is a 100-plus-year-old wooden carousel. The carousel originally was in Grants Park in Atlanta, which is basically now the Atlanta Zoo. It sat in storage for many years, but finally it was brought here to Chattanooga. It was reassembled. A local wood carving club built all new animals for it, 54 individually hand-carved wooden animals. The cost to ride the carousel is just a couple of bucks, so if you're here with the kids or the grandkids to go to the aquarium, after you're done at the aquarium, leave your car where it is, walk across this next bridge, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Go over there to Coolidge Park, ride the carousel. If it's hot out, maybe play in the water fountain, get you some Clumpy's ice cream, and then walk back across this bridge to your car at the end of the day. Now, the bridge we're going under now is the oldest in town. It's our Walnut Street Bridge. It was built in 1890. It's the first bridge to permanently span the Tennessee River anywhere along its length. It's also one of the oldest and longest examples of this sort of architecture left in the country. In 1973, they closed the Walnut Street Bridge. It was too old and too narrow to support the traffic, needing to get back and forth on it every day. The bridge sat there unused for 20 years, and they were getting ready to tear it down. However, the people of Chattanooga, they loved that old bridge so much, they started a foundation. They were able to raise enough money to save the bridge. They actually paid to have it stripped of all of its decking, redecked with wood to make it lighter, and then reopened as a pedestrian-only bridge. At the time, it was the longest pedestrian-only bridge over fresh water anywhere in the world. It's still one of the longest in the United States. At 2,376 feet, it's just under half a mile from bank to bank. Over on the right, the starboard side, you can see this tall limestone bluff. By the way, that is the tallest limestone bluff anywhere along the Tennessee River. On top of that bluff, you can see where it says Hunter Museum. The Hunter Museum is dedicated entirely to American art. In the middle of the museum, you can see the top of an old Victorian-style mansion. That's the Hunter Mansion. It originally belonged to a man by the name of Mr. Benjamin Thomas, though. Now, Mr. Thomas, around the turn of the century, he had an idea for a product that had been invented down in Atlanta, a product called Coca-Cola. You see, up until that time, Coca-Cola was strictly a fountain drink. And if you wanted to enjoy a Coke, you had to travel someplace that actually had a soda fountain. And even then, you had to drink it pretty quick because, it would go flat. Mr. Thomas had the idea for bottling Coke for the first time, at least on a commercial scale. He took on a partner, a man named Mr. Whitehead. The two men traveled down to Atlanta. They found the owners of Coca-Cola, and they told them about their idea for bottling and selling Coke in bottles. Well, the owners of Coke told them they were crazy. It would never work. It's impossible. It's a fountain drink only. You can't bottle it. In fact, they told Mr. Thomas if he persisted in this wacky idea, he was bound to lose whatever monies he invested in it, and he could even further damage the reputation of the Coca-Cola Company. Mr. Thomas didn't give up though. He was a very persistent businessman, and by the end of the day, he was able to talk the owners of Coke into a contract for the worldwide, perpetual, and exclusive rights to bottle Coke. What was the cost of that contract? $1. And Coke didn't even collect the dollar. The two men came back to town, contract in hand, and at 17 Market Street they opened up the very first Coca-Cola bottling company. Now they continued bottling and selling Coke in bottles, just buying the syrup from Coca-Cola, for almost 100 years. In the late 1980s, the descendants of those men finally sold the rights back to Coca-Cola for them to bottle their own product. Now the last of our four bridges here, this is our Veterans Bridge. The Veterans Bridge was built in 1984. Many cities have Veterans Bridges, just like theirs. Ours is dedicated to all the veterans of the United States, no matter where in the world they might be serving today. Now, if you look back up on top of our Veterans Bridge, you'll see a series of American flags. If you were to go round and round this island, like we do every day, and count all of those flags, you would see that there are, in fact, 31 American flags on Chattanooga's Veterans Bridge. We'd like to ask the question on here, a little bit of trivia for you folks. Does anybody happen to know why we have 31 American flags on our Veterans Bridge? Any guesses? Why exactly 31? It's because Tennessee's the 31st state, right? Nope, actually we're the 16th. It's because there's been 31 veterans from here, right? Well, that's a good guess, but this is the volunteer state after all. We've had many more veterans than that. It's not for 31 days of the month. That only works half the time. And I know some of you are thinking it, so I'll go ahead and tell you it's not for 31 flavors of ice cream. But I want you to think on that here for a few moments. Now, if you look off to the left, up on top of this hill, you can see this large brick building. That is GPS, Girls Preparatory School. That's one of 3 private boarding schools that I'm aware of in the Chattanooga area. We also have McCallie School for Boys, one of the largest all-boys boarding schools in the whole country. And we have a co-ed boarding school called Baylor. Now, many famous people have graduated from these schools, I'm sure, but the only one I can ever remember to tell anybody about is Ted Turner from Turner Television, graduated here in Chattanooga from McCallie High School. Some other famous people from Chattanooga. Did you all know that Samuel L. Jackson is from here? Did you know that Terrell Owens went to UTC here in town? Usher, the singer, he's from here. Olin Mills Studios, if you ever had your photo taken back in school, they're from here as well. Now over here on the starboard side, this island is called McClellan Island. McClellan Island has always been right here in downtown Chattanooga. It's about 18.8 acres in size. Today, it's been since 1954, it's been operated by the Chattanooga Audubon Society as a bird and wildlife sanctuary. There is a trail on it. You are allowed to go over there and visit, but that's really all that's on the island. In fact, if you look up towards the tops of these sycamore trees here in a moment at the head of the island, you'll notice all of these large grassy nests. This is the favorite nesting area of the great blue heron. Those are those large grayish bluish birds with the long legs and a long neck that look a little bit like a crane. Herons are here on the river all year round. Other migratory birds, they come here and hang out on the island all summer though. We have a lot of osprey that nest out here during the summertime. We have a lot of mallard ducks, Canada geese, kingfishers. We've seen red-tailed hawk out here. We've seen bald eagle out here recently, so do keep your eyes open. Now, before this was Audubon Island, it was actually used as farmland for around 200 years. They raised cattle out here on this island. River islands like this one make for excellent farmland. For one thing, you don't have to have a bunch of fencing to keep your cows in. They just won't swim across the river. Also, the land is very fertile. Nobody knows for sure how this island was formed, but at some point, something slowed the current in the middle of the river and sediment began to be deposited here. And the island is basically made out of rich sediment from the river, so you don't really need any fertilizer. Now, the downside to using river islands as farmland is that they do occasionally flood. This island in particular still floods to this day. Even with TVA's dams more or less controlling the Tennessee River. And there's a pretty good example of that here at the head of the island. You can see where these trees are, the bases of these trees are underwater. I would say the river's a good 5 feet up right now, than it usually is. But Chattanooga has a lot of history of flooding. They try their best to control it with the 9 dams, man-made dams on the river. But that canyon down below us acts as a natural bottleneck for the river, and sometimes they just can't help it. I've personally seen this river up a good 18 feet higher than you see right now. But the worst flood that Chattanooga has ever seen happened back in 1867. Back then, the river rose 58 feet higher than normal. It flooded downtown Chattanooga, and it left people stranded on the rooftops of some of our original buildings. There was a famous story about the farmer that was out here on the island during that flood. They say that he narrowly escaped the island with his life. They say the only way he did manage to survive that flood was by holding on to the horns of his cattle as he drifted off down the river. Now we're going to get turned around here. We're going to head back downriver, down the back side of McClellan Island. But before we get turned around, or as we're turning, for all of you Civil War buffs on the boat with us today, if you look off to the left, to be behind us here in a minute, you can see a ridge line there at the horizon. That is Missionary Ridge. Missionary Ridge is the site for the climactic battle for Chattanooga. The battle actually took place the day after the Battle above the Clouds, which of course was up on top of Lookout Mountain. So it was November 25th of 1863. It was a major victory for the Union Army and a major turning point in the war. Both sides knew that they had to control Chattanooga in order to win the war. Chattanooga is the gateway to the Deep South. One Confederate general was quoted as saying the Confederate retreat from Missionary Ridge would be the death knell of the Confederacy. And he was pretty much right. From there on, Sherman went on, he burnt Atlanta, and he made his infamous march to the sea. Now coming up here on the left, you can see there's a couple of old barges on the bank here. In fact, this one barge, the one that's closer to us, is actually beginning to sink. These have been here for quite some time. They're actually used by the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga to house their racing rowboats, their scull boats. Now, each year in November, Chattanooga hosts the largest rowing regatta anywhere in the country. It's called the Head of the Hooch, and it usually has about 10,000 rowing participants. The race gets its name from it used to be held on the Chattahoochee River, but the race just got too big. They needed a bigger venue, so they chose the Tennessee River at Chattanooga.
We went around the whole entire island, didn't we?
Now that we're on the backside of the island, like I mentioned earlier, keep your eyes out for wildlife, not just birds, but along the shores of the island, we often see muskrat, river otter, the occasional beaver. It's kind of cold out today, but if you look at the logs that are kind of sticking out from the island, the edge of the island there, we often see salagoogies.
We did.
Now, salagoogies, they love to sun themselves on these logs on a nice sunny day. And if you're wondering what is a salagoogie, that is a Creek Indian word for turtle. This river is full of turtles, and they say that's a pretty good indication of how clean the water actually is. Up next on the left, you can see there's a very large white and blue boat. Looks like it's been there for quite a while and certainly has seen some better days. That used to be a boat called the Leisure Lady, a gambling boat out of Florida. Now the man who owns that house, he purchased that vessel. He brought it here to town back in 2007, and he intended to turn it into a floating restaurant. He docked it right on the city dock, and he had people out there working on it. Well, after a few days, the fire marshal came down to the docks and basically kicked him off the dock. He didn't have any proper paperwork or permits in order. He just assumed he could do what he wanted to do, and he was forced to tie that boat up on his own property. But that's not where the story ends. About a year after that boat was sitting there where it is right now, his next door neighbors sued him over it, said that that boat was obstructing his view of the river. The case went all the way to court, and the judge determined that since that boat's on his own personal dock, he can put anything on it he very well pleases. So now that boat sits there out of spite. He'll never move it. He'll let it rot to the bottom of the river before he ever does anything with it. And here about, 14, 15 years later, he's held true to his word. Apparently, him and his next door neighbors still tell each other they're number one, if you know what I mean. Now, as we're going back underneath the Veterans Bridge, I'm sure at least one of you on board is actually paying attention to my narration and would like to know what is the answer to my question. Why 31 American flags on Chattanooga's Veterans Bridge? If there are any further guesses, I'll just go ahead and tell you the answer.